Sometimes the loudest thing a person says is nothing at all. A message goes unanswered. A conversation suddenly becomes shorter. Someone who once shared everything with you begins responding with a single word. No argument, no explanation, just silence. Most people assume silence means one thing: disinterest, anger, rejection. But silence is far more complicated than that. In fact, some of the strongest emotions a human being can experience are often hidden behind complete silence. Admiration, resentment, fear, attraction, regret, even love. And this creates a question that most people never stop to ask. If silence can mean so many different things, what is it actually revealing? The answer is hidden much deeper than most expect. Because silence is not simply the absence of words, it is communication stripped down to its most revealing form. And once you understand what silence exposes about the human mind, you'll begin noticing things about people that were invisible before. A friend who suddenly stops calling. A coworker who becomes unusually quiet around one specific person. A former partner who disappears but continues watching everything from a distance. A family member who avoids difficult conversations altogether. At first glance, these situations seem unrelated, yet they are often connected by the same psychological force. Something inside the person cannot comfortably exist in the open, so it retreats into silence. And that's where the real psychology begins. One of the biggest misconceptions about silence is that people become quiet when they have nothing to say. The opposite is often true. Many people become silent when they have too much to say. Think about a moment when you felt deeply hurt. Not mildly disappointed, not slightly annoyed, truly hurt. There is a good chance your first reaction wasn't endless talking. It was withdrawal, a kind of emotional retreat. Words suddenly felt inadequate or dangerous. You knew that if you spoke, emotions might spill out in ways you couldn't control. So you said nothing. Most people have experienced this. But here's where it gets interesting. The same mechanism appears in completely different situations. A person develops feelings for someone. Instead of becoming more expressive, they become quieter. A worker feels intimidated by a highly competent colleague. They speak less around them. Someone secretly envies a friend. Conversations become strangely restrained. In each case, silence is not empty. It is crowded with emotion. The reason is hidden in how the mind protects itself. Human beings like to believe they are rational creatures, yet much of our behavior is governed by emotions we barely understand. When an emotion becomes too intense, the mind often reduces exposure. It pulls back, creates distance, avoids vulnerability, and silence becomes the easiest form of protection. This is why some of the most emotionally charged relationships contain surprisingly little communication. Not because nothing is happening, because too much is happening. Yet most people miss this entirely. They interpret silence literally. If someone isn't speaking, they assume nothing meaningful exists beneath the surface. But very few people notice this. Silence often functions like pressure beneath a sealed container. The less visible it becomes, the more powerful it may actually be. Consider workplace dynamics. Imagine two co-workers. One constantly debates, jokes, and speaks openly. The other remains quiet whenever a certain manager enters the room. Most observers assume the silent employee lacks confidence. Perhaps, but not always. Sometimes silence appears when someone is carefully monitoring every word, every expression, every reaction. The person isn't disengaged, they're hyper-engaged. Their mind is working overtime, analyzing, calculating, protecting, and that changes everything. Because silence can reveal not indifference, but psychological investment. The The strange part is that people often become most silent around those whose opinions matter most. A teenager may speak casually around classmates but become unusually quiet around a parent whose approval they desperately seek. An employee may joke with co-workers but become reserved around a respected mentor. Someone attracted to another person may suddenly lose their normal conversational confidence. The external behavior looks similar. The internal experience is completely different. What most people interpret as distance is sometimes emotional exposure, and that's only the first layer. Carl Jung observed that much of human behavior is influenced by unconscious forces operating beneath awareness. People often believe they understand their motives, yet their actions reveal something entirely different. Silence is one of the places where these hidden forces become visible. Because when people stop speaking, they lose one of their primary tools for managing perception. Words help us construct an image. Words help us explain ourselves. Words help us hide. Silence removes that shield, and what emerges can be surprisingly revealing. For example, have you ever noticed how some people become silent during conflict, while others become louder? Most people assume the loud person is stronger, the quiet person weaker, but psychology suggests something more complex. Sometimes the loud individual is desperately trying to regain control. The silent individual may already understand something the other person does not. They may have emotionally detached, or they may be observing, waiting, processing. Not every silence is weakness. In fact, some forms of silence require tremendous restraint. The ability to remain quiet when angry, to remain quiet when provoked, to remain quiet when misunderstood. That kind of silence often reveals inner control that words cannot demonstrate. But here's where things become revealing. Not all silence comes from strength. Some silence comes from fear. And distinguishing between the two changes how you see people forever. Imagine someone who avoids every difficult conversation. Problems arise, nothing gets discussed. Questions remain unanswered. Months pass, the silence continues. From the outside, it may appear calm, but underneath, something entirely different is happening. The person is not protecting peace. They're protecting themselves from discomfort. This type of silence isn't strength, it's avoidance, and avoidance has consequences. Unspoken frustrations accumulate, misunderstandings multiply, relationships slowly weaken. The silence feels safe in the moment, but expensive in the long run. The deeper truth is that silence always serves a purpose. The question is, what purpose? Protection? Observation? Resentment? Attraction? Fear? Control? Most people never investigate this. They only react to the silence itself. And because of that, they misunderstand the person creating it. A partner becomes quiet. They assume rejection. A friend withdraws. They assume betrayal. A co-worker says less. They assume hostility. Sometimes they're correct, but often they're responding to a story their own mind invented. And this is where another hidden psychological mechanism enters the picture: projection. One of Jung's most important insights was that people frequently project their own fears onto others. When someone goes silent, we rarely interpret their silence objectively. We interpret it through our own insecurities. If we fear abandonment, silence feels like abandonment. If we fear rejection, silence feels like rejection. If we fear being unimportant, silence feels like proof that we are. Yet the actual reason may have nothing to do with us at all. This is why two people can experience the same silence and reach completely different conclusions. One feels offended. The other feels curious. One assumes hostility. The other senses hidden emotion. Neither truly knows. And that's what makes silence so psychologically fascinating. It creates a vacuum, and the human mind hates vacuums. Whenever information disappears, imagination rushes in to replace it. What happens next explains everything. Because there is one particular form of silence that reveals more about the human mind than any other. It appears in friendships, relationships, families, workplaces, even among strangers. Most people misinterpret it completely. They assume it means absence, but in reality, it often signals the exact opposite: presence. A psychological presence so powerful that words become difficult. A silence created not by emotional distance, but by an internal conflict happening beneath awareness. And once you recognize this specific kind of silence, you'll begin seeing hidden emotions everywhere. Because the people who feel the most are not always the ones who speak the most. Sometimes they're the ones saying nothing at all. And the reason why may be one of the most misunderstood truths in human psychology. Because that internal conflict is often a battle between what a person feels and what they are willing to admit. Not to you, to themselves. This is the silence that confuses people the most. Someone cares, yet becomes distant. Someone misses you, yet never reaches out. Someone watches from afar, yet never speaks. Someone wants answers, yet avoids asking questions. Their behavior seems contradictory because two opposing forces operating at the same time. One part of the mind wants connection, another part wants protection. And when neither side wins, silence appears. This is why human behavior can look so irrational. People imagine that emotions automatically create action. If someone likes you, they will show it. If someone respects you, they will tell you. If someone misses you, they will call. But reality is rarely that simple. Fear often sits between feeling and action. A person may admire someone deeply and remain silent because they fear looking foolish. They may care intensely and remain silent because they fear rejection. They may want reconciliation and remain silent because their pride refuses to move first. What nobody tells you is that pride and vulnerability are constantly fighting inside people, and silence is often the battlefield. Think about two former friends who stopped speaking after a misunderstanding. Years pass. Neither reaches out. Both occasionally think about the other. Both wonder what happened. Both tell themselves a story. If they cared, they would contact me. The strange part is that both people may be thinking exactly the same thing. Neither is indifferent. Neither has forgotten. Yet silence continues. Not because there is no emotion, because emotion has become tangled with ego. This is where the real psychology begins. Many people assume silence reveals what a person feels toward others. Sometimes it reveals what they feel toward themselves. The person who avoids expressing appreciation may secretly struggle with vulnerability. The person who never apologizes may be fighting shame. The person who disappears after becoming emotionally close may be confronting fears they don't understand. Their silence is not always a statement about you. Sometimes it is evidence of a conflict inside them. And this explains something that happens in relationships all the time. Someone seems deeply connected. The conversations are effortless. The emotional bond grows stronger. Then suddenly, they become quieter. Shorter responses, longer gaps, less openness. Most people immediately focus on the relationship. What changed between us? But sometimes the real question is different. What changed inside them? Because emotional closeness has a strange effect on the human mind. It exposes parts of ourselves that usually remain hidden. In Jungian psychology, these hidden aspects are often connected to what Jung called the shadow. The shadow contains qualities, fears, insecurities, desires, and emotions people prefer not to acknowledge. Most of the time, those parts remain buried. Then someone enters our life and unexpectedly activates them. A relationship becomes serious. A friendship becomes meaningful. An emotional connection deepens. Suddenly old fears emerge. Fear of abandonment, fear of inadequacy, fear of loss, fear of dependence. And that's when something unexpected happens. The closer someone feels emotionally, the more silence may begin to appear. Not because intimacy failed, because intimacy succeeded. The connection became real enough to awaken parts of the person they had been avoiding. This is one reason why silence often appears at moments that seem completely illogical. Everything appears to be going well. Then distance emerges. Most people never realize that emotional intensity can create withdrawal. The stronger the feeling, the stronger the urge to protect oneself from potential pain. But there is another form of silence that reveals something even deeper: respect. And surprisingly, respect is often quieter than affection. People speak openly around those they feel equal to. They become more careful around those they genuinely admire. Watch what happens when someone enters a room occupied by a person they greatly respect. Their body language changes. Their words become more deliberate. Their confidence may even decrease. Not because they feel inferior, because significance creates awareness. The opinion of that person matters. And when someone's opinion matters, silence often grows. This is why many people completely misread respect. They look for enthusiasm, attention, constant communication. Yet some of the deepest forms of respect express themselves through restraint rather than expression. A child listening carefully to a grandparent. A student absorbing every word from a mentor. An employee observing a leader they admire. Silence can signal attention, and attention is one of the purest forms of respect. Yet something even deeper is happening beneath the surface. The most revealing silence of all occurs when a person is confronting a truth they can no longer avoid. Every human being carries a persona, the image presented to the world, the identity they want others to see. Confident, independent, strong, successful, unbothered. But life has a way of challenging those identities. A betrayal exposes vulnerability. A failure damages pride. A loss reveals dependence. A relationship reveals emotional needs. And when the persona begins to crack, people often become quiet, extremely quiet, because their mind is reorganizing itself. The story they told themselves no longer fits reality. The old identity no longer explains their experience, and silence becomes a transitional space between who they thought they were and who they are becoming. This is why some of the most transformative periods of life are surprisingly silent. After heartbreak, after loss, after major change, after profound realization, the person may appear withdrawn, yet internally, enormous psychological reconstruction is taking place. The silence is not emptiness, it is transformation. Like roots growing underground where nobody can see them. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Not everyone understands their own silence. Many people assume silence is always intentional. It isn't. Sometimes a person cannot explain why they are withdrawing because they genuinely do not know. Their conscious mind is only seeing the surface. The deeper causes remain hidden. Anxiety, shame, conflict, attachment, fear, unresolved emotions. The behavior appears first. Understanding arrives later, sometimes much later. This is why human beings are often mysteries even to themselves. And once you understand this, something changes in the way you see people. You stop rushing to conclusions. You stop assuming every silence is rejection. You stop believing every silence is hostility. You begin asking a different question. What might be happening beneath the silence? Because beneath silence, there is almost always a story, a fear, a wound, a desire, a conflict, a truth waiting to emerge. Of course, some silences do indicate indifference. Some people simply move on. Some conversations genuinely end. Some relationships fade naturally. That reality exists too. But the answer is more uncomfortable than most expect. People often want certainty. They want silence to mean one thing, one clear explanation, one simple answer. The human mind prefers neat conclusions, yet silence refuses to provide them. Silence forces us into uncertainty, and uncertainty reveals something important about us. How quickly we fill empty spaces with assumptions. How eagerly we create stories. How often we project our fears onto situations we don't fully understand. In many ways, another person's silence becomes a mirror. It reflects our own insecurities, expectations, and emotional patterns back to us. And that may be the greatest lesson silence has to offer. Because what a person's silence reveals is not only information about their mind, it also reveals information about yours. The meaning you assign, the conclusions you reach, the emotions it triggers, the stories you create. All of these expose hidden parts of your own psychology. And perhaps that is why silence feels so powerful. Words direct attention outward. Silence directs attention inward. It forces people to confront uncertainty, to confront assumptions, to confront themselves. The irony is that most people spend their lives trying to decode what silence means about others. Yet the deepest insight arrives when they realize silence is revealing two minds at once. The mind of the person who became quiet, and the mind of the person trying to understand why. Once you see that, silence no longer feels empty. It becomes one of the most revealing forms of human communication that exists. Because sometimes, the loudest truth is never spoken. Sometimes it lives in the pause after a question, the message that was never sent, the apology that never arrived, the feeling that remained hidden, the conversation that never happened. And if you learn to observe those moments carefully, you'll begin noticing something most people spend their entire lives overlooking. Human beings rarely reveal themselves most clearly when they are speaking. They reveal themselves when words disappear and only the mind remains. And after understanding that, you'll never look at silence or people the same way again.